Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello Ranks Squad and welcome to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. My name's Jack Collins and I will be your host today as we take a look back at the first legs of the Champions League semi-finals. Two very different games, two ties poised on a knife edge ahead of the second legs. PSG 5, Bayern Munich 4 at the Parc des Princes yesterday in Paris, and Atletico Madrid 1, Arsenal 1 at the Metropolitano in Madrid today. So there is plenty of chances for all four of these to make that showpiece event in Budapest. We'll work through both of these games, the thrills, the spills, the skills, and of course the controversies as well. I'm joined by the one and only Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. It's very poetic, mate. Nice little bit of rhyming there, throwing it back to the old school. I'm good. I can hear you very clearly, Jack, because I've got new headphones. The headphones that I've previously been wearing were bought during COVID, and when I say they were falling apart, I'm not lying, am I?
No.
One of the ear, what are they called? Like the muff things, like the padded things, whatever they are. That had literally fallen off. For the last couple of weeks while I've been recording, it's just been this like plastic stuck to my ear. I look very weird. This isn't a YouTube video. But anyway, I've invested. New pair of cans on there. Look at that. Mate, this is great because we don't know who's going to be in the final. That's what I like the most about right now. Things we love, absolutely no idea who's going to be in the final. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm completely with you. It was two very different days, as I say, but two games that I thought were intriguing in their own way. And there'll be a lot of people that roll their eyes at that, right? After the kind of difference between them. I think that Tuesday's game between PSG and Bayern was an absolute feast of entertainment. It was, helter-skelter. It was two teams just going at each other with pure attacking prowess. But also we'll talk a little bit about some of the defensive aspects of that as well and some of those things that were missing. Today's game between Arsenal and Atleti felt far more like a normal Champions League semi-final. And I think when you kind of hold it up to the light of what yesterday was, people would look at it and be like, oh, that was really boring. And look, it wasn't, thriller minute for the entirety of the 90 minutes by any stretch of the imagination. But I did think it was an interesting contest where the momentum swung, where two teams went at it in a very different manner. There were periods of this game that were wild in terms of decisions that were made, in terms of the way that possession changed hands, in terms of waves of attack. And I thought it was, a genuinely very interesting game. If that had come first, and we've been talking about that, all of Wednesday, I think people would have had plenty of talking points. Well, yeah. It's just because it follows on from maybe one of the games of the century in the night before.
Well, the thing is, we knew in Atleti against Arsenal, like every goal really mattered. That's what made it dramatic for me. Like with decisions like, and the penalties, it's funny that that's the only way we're seeing goals in that game is are we getting a penalty? Two teams notorious for being a little bit guarded in the way that they play. But it meant that if someone scored, it meant so much. Whereas when PSG or Bayern score in the second leg, we barely get a bad eyelid because we're like, well, there's loads more to come. So we're not going to. It's like watching a basketball game. You don't go crazy every time someone scores. That's how it felt a little bit as that game wore on Tuesday.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, let's break this up. Let's start with Tuesday's action. Let's start with that mad game, as you say, in the Parc des Princes. It ended PSG 5, Bayern 4. To be honest, it could have been 9-8, as you say, and I don't think anyone would have been particularly surprised. But more than anything, Dean, in a year where we've talked about attritional football a lot, in a year where we've talked about defences being on top a lot of the time, it did feel somewhat freeing to watch just two of the best attacks in world football completely go at each other, and two teams who look, there are lots of discussions around this. Now, I want to come on to defenses a little bit later, but just as kind of one of the overarching topics, one of the things that I thought was interesting was over here in the UK on the broadcast afterwards, Clarence Seedorf and Wayne Rooney were talking about the fact they were like, well, I still think that Arsenal will maybe win this because they know how to defend. And I saw a couple of takes on this online. I heard Jonathan Wilson speaking on the Guardian Weekly Football podcast about it today. He was like, oh, this is what happens if you don't defend, and teams who've not learned how to defend. I kind of take this slightly differently, and I would take it under the idea that if you have two teams who are this good at attacking, when you look at these teams and you go, okay, name three of the five best players on Bayern, or three of the five best players on this PSG team, you're naming pretty much the entire front threes. And, they're in that conversation. There are other players too, but you're naming those players, I think in particular. You go out there and you set your team up to win. I don't think that Luis Enrique and Vincent Kompany set their teams up yesterday to be like, let's play the most entertaining game of football anyone's ever seen. They set their teams up to give themselves the best chance of how they thought they could win the game. And I think sometimes in the context around these things, that gets lost. This was an incredible display of attacking talent, even if it was risky in terms of the manner in which they played football.
Yeah, look, like I understand like the saying of, defenses win you trophies and all of that, but you've got to score goals, right? And Arsenal don't score goals. So we want to see goals in matches, and this was unbelievable as a spectacle in that sense. And people, if they want to assess the defending, then by all means go for it. But I would turn it back around and saying PSG have just scored 5 goals in one game against Bayern Munich. Arsenal have scored 5 goals in their last 7 games. That for me is a massive problem. If you're pitched against them in a final, that's a massive problem. So ultimately, yes, you've got to have a strong defense. Yes, you've got to win your one-on-one battles, etc., etc. But if you can't score goals, you ain't going to win the cup. And at the moment, I'd have to lean towards one of PSG or Bayern going on to win the trophy. If I was to rank right now, I'd go Bayern, PSG, Atleti, Arsenal because of the goal power.
Equally, I think you kind of look at it and be like, well, if you can keep a clean sheet, then you only need one. But I will say this.
But it could be broken. If they can score that score like that easily, then it can be broken, right?
Yeah, well, this is it, right? So obviously head coach Harry Brooks, long-term friend of the pod, tweeted last night. I found his tweets about this really interesting. And people were like, surely they could do with a bit more control, a bit more defensive discipline. And Harry's response was just, why? If they lost 1-0, people would say, well, win this game back in Germany. It ended 5-4, which is obviously the same outcome. Football has kind of gaslit people into thinking that attacking open front foot football is more risky to the result. It's not. Of course it's not. If you try to play safe, secure, not open, then just one goal, which can happen at any moment, can be all the difference. The opposition can look at you and go, if we score just one goal, we've got a great chance of winning. Compared to the approach we saw yesterday where the opposition will go, we could score 4 goals and still can't be too confident of a win. He said he personally thinks it's way less risky when one goal from the opposition could make all the difference compared to them needing multiple goals. Imagine being so good, so offensive, the opposition would believe even 3 goals being in the lead may not be enough. He says that's far less risky from his approach than playing to keep the game tight. Obviously, there are going to be different schools of thought on this, right? And people will point to Jose Mourinho and Pep Guardiola, let's say. You can take that further back. I think there's an ideological matchup that's been going on for decades there. Look at Helenio Herrera's famous Inter side, the kind of invention of Catenaccio, and then Johan Cruyff redeveloping that with Rinus Michels and Total Football. There have always been multiple schools of thought on how to play the game. And it doesn't mean that one is more, necessarily correct than the other. These are 2 ways of doing it. But I do find it interesting that, we have kind of been led to believe, or at least it feels to be the common thing. You use the word pragmatism. quite a lot. Not you, but just generally people use the word pragmatism quite a lot. And I think often with a coach, it's used in a quite negative sense. And I always kind of kick back at that and be like, well, pragmatism is just finding a way to win the game. Equally, I think that sometimes we think of a manager and be like, oh, they'll shut up shop with a 1-0 lead. And we think, oh, obviously that's a smart way to see out fixtures, when actually scoring 3 or 4 goals might be the more sensible way of actually seeing that out.
Well, Vincent Kompany, I think, summed it up pretty well afterwards. He basically said there's no middle ground here. Like at this level, I've either got to go and play attacking football or I play defensive football. I can't settle somewhere in the middle. You might be able to do that. My under 10 team, I might get them to play attacking, but then also like revert to defensive play, whatever. At different levels, you can get away with that.
I think even Dean, in the kind of if someone said that to me about Fulham, I'd be like, yeah, fair enough, but maybe not in terms of the very top of the Champions League.
Top of the Champions League, playing against PSG away, like you can't give both. You can't not to its full extent to get the best out of it, right? And so he's committed to a more front-footed approach to the game. And he's putting his foot down on this because he said we're going to see even more of it in the second leg. He's not going to look for a narrow win in the second leg. So he says, he's saying, nah, let's do more of that. And that makes me excited. I mean, why would you not want to watch a game where the first leg ended 5-4 and the team that's lost 5-4, their manager's coming out saying, yeah, we're going to play like that again at home and see how many goals we can score. That is what football's supposed to be about. And I don't mind people having different approaches to the game. I think personally, if I was to manage a football team, I think I'd be a bit more defensive minded, even though I never played the game that way myself. I think I have more fear inside me and I would worry about conceding goals. So I think I'd get my team to play a bit within themselves. I love that Vincent Kompany, who by trade is a defender, is able to switch to being, I'm going all out attack against the most attacking team in Europe. Like, that's unbelievable for him to do that.
I mean, look, it's something he did with Burnley back in the Championship, where they were an incredibly freewheeling attacking side. That approach didn't necessarily translate to the Premier League, but obviously he now has amongst the best players in the world at his disposal, and he can play like this again. And actually, again, we have these discussions sometimes, and I often end up talking with people about Ange Postecoglou, who obviously has a pretty kind of vehement way about how he views the game and how it should be played. And someone was saying to me, well, you should just kind of calm down. I'm like, no. He's not doing that because he's genuinely like, this should be fun. It doesn't matter if we lose 5-4. He's saying his team out like that because he believes that's the best way to win a game of football, right? Like that is the optimal way to go and try and get 3 points. And I think this is a similar thing we're kind of talking about here. And look, that doesn't mean that all of the defending was perfect. And I think that actually, in terms of how it was in the first half, we saw PSG being run at with the ball by Bayern and them struggling to kind of get across for man coverage. And then the flip side of that is in the second half, I thought they adjusted relatively well, despite the fact that the Bayern scored 2 goals from them being 5-2 up. If you actually look at the way those goals come about, one's from a set piece and the other one is just an absurdly unbelievable bit of play from Harry Kane dropping into the quarterback role and playing a pass that should be out of reach for most players. But Luis Diaz produces one of the touches of the season to bring it down, steady himself, set his man and somehow find the far corner. Like, those are 2 just unbelievable pieces of art. I thought that PSG's defense in the second half was actually much better than it had been in the first half, despite the fact they conceded the same amount of goals. And maybe that speaks again to the point of being like these moments that can get you at any given moment when these players are this good. I think actually with Bayern, something they did in the Real Madrid game in the quarterfinals that we spoke about a little bit at the time was they left themselves one-on-one with incredibly talented players in acres of space. And Upamecano, I thought, had a very, very good game in the Real Madrid first leg. I actually thought he was Bayern's best defender yesterday in terms of the way that he covered space. But also, if you have players willing to run into space like Kvaratskhelia and then kind of Vitinha's run there was bombing forward from midfield, Hakimi, Doué, you know how many players PSG can throw forward into these situations. Sometimes in those situations, you're going to get run off the park because these players are so talented. That's a risk that Bayern took. I thought in the second half, they didn't necessarily adjust to that in the way that PSG perhaps did.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Pavlovic was extremely important. In trying to get to like you're in such a difficult position against PSG because not only are they they're just attacking at free will, right, with whichever combination of forward players they put in there. But obviously their midfield combinations are extraordinarily good as well. So you need somebody that can kind of get to grips with what Vitinha's doing and also give you your own version with that. And I think with the amount of tackles that Pavlovic that was making that were key, and helping kind of transition the game back into their favour when they needed it. I thought it was a key performance for me in terms of the way that it kind of panned out in terms of just trying to get something back from the game. Look, I have to say, I can't believe that PSG let Bayern get back in the door. I do have a slight problem with that. As much as I loved the game, at 5-2 up in a semi-final, to end it 5-4, I don't think I would be totally okay with that if I'm Lewis, because like that's a 3-goal advantage going into that second leg is so significant. And 1 goal, given the amount of goals that were scored, just feels like basically a draw.
Yeah, and look, it's something we talked about with Bayern's performance against Real Madrid. And then, after 1 minute, Arda Güler scores and the game's level. And you're like, oh, wow, all of that work from the first leg has almost gone out the window. The flip side, I would argue, is probably what a kind of variation on what I just said there. I don't know. Those 2 goals aren't set about by the fact that PSG aren't defending in the right way. They're just, a set piece goal and then an absolute worldie. So it's quite difficult.
That's why it's so hard to analyze, right? Because like it wasn't. And like Company said this as well. He was like, he said, I don't think there was particularly bad defending in all of these circumstances. It's just that like the way the game was played, it was just great attacking play. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the other team has done anything particularly wrong in key moments of the game. It's just like sometimes goals are scored and that's what happens. So like there was a long time left. That was the problem for PSG. At 5-2, there was still plenty of the game left. And like Bayern are just too good to kind of just sit back and accept it. And obviously the way in which they got themselves back into the game, like you say, was kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, look, Seni Mayulu hits the post. There is that incredible moment where they might be like, well, actually, we might need more than 3 in order to see this one off, given how good Bayern are, and therefore keep kind of going for the jugular in some ways. I wanted to pick out just a couple of players before we move over to the other game, Dean, because, I mean, look, we could spend 20 minutes on each of Elise, Kane, Diaz, Kvaratskhelia, Dembele, Hakimi. It was just a feast for the eyes in so many different ways. But I thought that for me, Luis Diaz put in a performance that kind of outshone everyone. And that is remarkable, given that he was 1 on the losing team and 2, given the quality of some of these other superstar attacking performances. But I think the moment that you kind of look at it and going, wow, Luis Diaz is really on a heater tonight. And this isn't necessarily that he was the best player on the park for 90 minutes. But at 5-2 down, Bayern were rocking. They'd gone 4-2 down. They conceded a really mad goal for the 5th one where Neuer's kick out is intercepted, and they end up in this situation where they've thrown 7 bodies forward and it rolls across, and Kvaratskhelia kind of just puts the ball to bed, and you're like, oh, okay, right, we're in trouble here. But Luis Diaz almost takes it upon himself to bring Bayern back into the game. And he starts demanding the ball. He starts running at players. And actually what's interesting is I think he gets shut down 3 times before he actually pulls something off. So first, I think Hakimi knocks him out of play when he's trying to get down that right flank. Then I think Upamecano shuts him down as he's trying to dribble into the box. And third, he does that amazing little bit of skill around 2 players, but Safonov comes out and claims the ball. And you're thinking, wow, some players after 2-3 attempts are like, you know what, I've done my bit. But Luis Diaz's relentlessness, the resilience he has within him to make things happen, he then wins the free kick that they end up heading in for 5-3. And it's obviously his incredible touch finish stand up that and makes it 5-4. And I just thought that in that moment where Bayern perhaps were for the first time wavering in their belief that this was going to be their season, that this was going to be their game, that they had the quality to go kind of stroke for stroke with PSG to stand there and slug them out for the entirety of 180 minutes. He was the one that grabbed the rest of the team by the scruff of the neck and dragged them back to their feet.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have predicted that before the game if you were to give me game changers, match winners. Like obviously we know he's got it in his locker. But I don't know, for some reason with Diaz, maybe I'm being harsh, but I kind of look at him as a player that's good when the going's good. And obviously for most of his time at Bayern, the going is good. And this is one thing that Bayern and PSG don't face domestically is much adversity, right? Like they don't have this constant challenge week in, week out of must-win games. It's just not the same as some of the other teams that you get in this competition at this level. But super impressive from him to stand up and be counted like that and put people like me into the shade, really.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was remarkable. And that kind of ability to get everyone back on their feet when the going was tough was incredible. And look, that hasn't been to say there haven't been challenges. You know, Dortmund have had a decent season without ever feeling they were going to kind of pull the punches. And I think that Lens have been pretty remarkable in France, but are going to end up falling short given the situation in the table right now. I mean, that right flank of PSG, left flank of Bayern was a really interesting battle for the whole thing because it felt like Achraf Hakimi had been given the instruction to drive up at Alphonso Davies and try and shut off the passing lane and effectively not allow them to get those 2-on-1 overloads down the side. It meant that Luis Diaz was isolated against Upamecano a lot of the time. And it did feel like two teams who were willing to go one-on-one, man for man, in almost every position. And sometimes I think when we look at these games, you know, and one of the kind of counter arguments, I suppose, to the defense is good is you would point at Nuno Mendes as one of the best one-on-one defenders in the game, right? Like he just stood out there so often in terms of being a man that can lock down a defensive unit and just be like, I'm going to hold my ground. But he was torched in the first half by Michael Olise and even Stanisic getting forward as well. The other way, Kvaratskhelia was having his way down the PSG left. And for me, you're kind of looking at it and going, wow, these are unbelievable defenders who are getting stood up time and time again by the kind of quickness of ball, by the movement within, you know, and actually trying to get that game plan to operate. You know, PSG love space to gallop into, especially for Kvaratskhelia. Bayern love it when they're able to drop Harry Kane in and open up those gaps for their wingers to cut inside and attack. Jamal Musiala loves to be able to drive with the ball, as does Diaz, from deep spaces. This is the game that both teams wanted in some ways. And I find that interesting in that obviously there are elements of kind of, wow, can you kind of keep this up for 180 minutes? But also the flip side of it being, you know, this is actually the situation where you want to put your best players into on a regular basis.
Yeah, exactly that. I love that both teams are going to go into the second leg with just no fear. And I think that that's what's going to make it a remarkable spectacle next Wednesday. There's so much at stake, yet it will be a sense of excitement rather than nervousness. Like that. That's what's going to be good about it. Like there's no shame, I don't think, from here for either of these teams. I feel like there's more on the line for Bayern to prove, being at home, trying to take that step towards becoming European champions, whereas PSG are obviously just trying to defend, which in itself is obviously remarkable that they've managed to even get to this stage again, and they continue to show such a nous for winning big matches. So I think there's slightly more pressure on Bayern, but I still don't think you're getting the nervousness that, for example, you'll have at the Emirates next week.
What I loved was Luis Enrique's comments after the game. He said, it was a game we deserved to win. It was also a game we deserved to draw, and it quite possibly could have been a game we deserved to lose. And I really enjoyed it. And I was like, you know what? Fair enough. He has produced some of the most entertaining teams we've ever seen. His Barcelona side were an absolute vision. His PSG side were a vision last year.
It's nice that he's still doing it, isn't it? Because there must be part of him that just thinks, how can I just give us the best chance of just like seeing out this game? And he just doesn't settle. And I find that very admirable.
I mean, I think with Luis Enrique, and this is, you know, slightly deeper than perhaps we would normally go, on a kind of a level, I genuinely believe that, you know, with the incredibly sad death of his daughter, Jana, that he's kind of decided that football is like, it's not actually the end of the world. Like, if you lose a game, he's like, we may as well go out and give our best and try and have fun while we're doing it. I need players that are going to buy into my philosophy and my mentality. And Ousmane Dembele was talking about that after the game, the Ballon d'Or winner, the current holder of that. And they were like, how do you find it, the energy to run so much? And he was like, well, if I don't, then I'll get benched. And they were like, right, okay, fair enough. Like, to have that kind of hold over your players, obviously comes from winning and experience and them learning to trust you. But I also think he has developed a part of his game where he's like, look, lads, at the end of the day, there are actually more important things than this. The football is so joyful, and I want to play joyful football as a celebration rather than being kind of everything or nothing in terms of winning. And there's something, I suppose, quite freeing about that. But that's kind of, I suppose, conjecture more than anything else.
Yeah, no, totally. But brilliant game, mate. And I know that the majority of the rank squad would have absolutely loved the game. As you mentioned at the top, there have been a few people who have reflected upon the game and talked about, questionable defending, and should games really at this level be allowed to become that open and free scoring and basketball-like. But ultimately, mate, that if you're turning up at a football match, that is what you want to see.
It's quite childlike in some ways, in the kind of way it was played.
It's a sport it's escapism for us when we're watching football.
Well, I was on the radio today, and Tom Rennie, my co-host, was telling a story, and he was like, what were you watching? His daughter came in, who's 6, and was like, what are you watching? And he was like, the football. And she was like, how do you play? He was like, how do I explain this to a 6-year-old? Actually, very simply, the aim of the game is to score more goals than the opposition. And, that's what we saw play out in the simplest form last night. And that's to simplify it well beyond any level of, kind of technical analysis. And there's so much more to it, that and the way that they played in the movement and these kind of rotations in there that allowed this game to open up so much. But at the end of the day, this was two teams trying to outscore the other. And that is the very, very essence, I suppose, of what the game is all about.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're a fan going to a game and you're expecting your team to go and attack and give everything it takes to score enough goals to win the game, it's so much more freeing than knowing you're going to watch a team that is going to just defend and hope to win 1-0 or hope that something comes their way, but ultimately they're going to defend first and foremost. Don't get me wrong, I've watched a Roy Hodgson Fulham experiment that was played out brilliantly, and I loved it because we did that, and it was what we needed at the time. But if you gave me a choice, I'd rather watch a load of goals being scored.
I don't think there would have been many Bayern fans who walked out of the Parc des Princes yesterday after that game feeling, really despondent or disappointed. I think they would have been like, annoying that we couldn't get like a point or a draw, but they wouldn't have walked out of there being like, that was the worst thing ever.
No, I don't think they feel beaten. I think that I think that this game is kind of pretty much as you were. I don't think the goal margin counts for much at this point. I might be wrong, but we'll find out next week.
We will indeed. Right, we're going to take a little break then. We come back on the other side. We're going to flip things to a very different game in Madrid between Atletico Madrid and Arsenal, but one that was not without its fair share of drama either. Stick with us here on Champions League Takeaway. Welcome back to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. Jack Collins and Dean Jones alongside you, looking back at the first legs of the Champions League semi-finals. We've covered the 9-goal thriller at the Parc des Princes. Now it's over to a game where the spoils were shared 1-1 between Atletico Madrid and Arsenal at the Metropolitano. Both goals coming from the penalty spot. Both goals with penalties that almost took the back of the net off. Victor Gyökeres in the first half, Julian Alvarez in the second. And whilst there wasn't as many goals as there were yesterday, Dean, it was still a game that ebbed and flowed in quite a nice manner, I thought.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, as I say, I was actually entertained by this game. I didn't think it was disappointing. I didn't think it was dull. And it really could have gone either way. I think this morning, Arsenal fans listening to this will feel hard done by. I think that they will feel that the second penalty should have been given, as was the initial decision, and that they'd have been confident they'd have scored that and they would hold a 2-1 lead going back to the Emirates next week, which would have been significant because while I said I don't think the 1-goal edge counts for much for PSG and Bayern, there is so much more value to a goal in this particular tie
Agreed.
between these two teams. Atleti, I thought they started strongly, right? Atleti said they were going to. You always felt Atleti were going to come into this game looking to start intensely, ride the emotion of the fans and the passion, and try to get on top of Arsenal and play on their nerves. And I wondered if that might happen. Toilet rolls are being thrown onto the pitch. The stadium's rocking.
They did not shut up about the toilet roll on the entirety of the commentary over here
really?
for like a good 90 minutes. Like half time, we're getting updates on where the toilet roll had got to. Every time a player went to take a throw in, it was like, they're going to have to remove some toilet roll, like a running joke. It was deeply, deeply upsetting for most of it.
I don't... Is that a thing at Atleti? I don't remember it really being something I've seen, like on big occasions. I mean, maybe I've forgotten, but I don't think
it's like not a thing. I just don't think it's like a thing in the same way that it is in certain stadiums in South America, for example, where it's more perhaps of a tradition. But I've seen them do it before.
Yeah. Anyway, look, Arsenal did manage to survive those early stages, and Atleti did test them. I think that the threat of Lookman and Simeone, they'd look to push in behind. I think Arsenal managed that pretty well early on, knowing that the little touches of Alvarez and Griezmann were going to be so key as to how Atleti would try to build up and hit them in the box. But then, Arsenal would get a chance of their own. Hincapié, for example, had a good one that he couldn't take advantage of. Ultimately, Atleti would quite often leave Julian Alvarez up top, and then they'd all come back into shape, basically a 5-4-1, and then look to get someone to join him as and when they could. Alvarez obviously scored the penalty, but he'll be wondering how he hasn't scored more than one goal on the night. There's that shot which forces a great save out of David Raya. Another header as well that he could have scored in the first half, but Arsenal had their own opportunities. Madueke had an opportunity, and then comes the penalty on 42 minutes. Gyökeres does really well to get to position himself between the ball and the defender, and Hanko gives the ref a decision to make. Right, so like it's there, and I think it's the right decision, and once Gyökeres gets that ball on the spot, strikes it to the keeper's right, he's got no chance. Like it's great, and it's advantage Arsenal. So then you're wondering, okay, like how do they deal with this? As they're walking off the pitch, all you can hear is Arsenal fans singing 1-0 to the Arsenal, like same old story. I mean, it feels at the moment like Arsenal are just going to try and win the double with 1-0 wins. Obviously, got a 1-0 win against Newcastle last time out in the league. Obviously, to get through to the Champions League semi-final in the first place, they beat Sporting 1-0 on aggregate. And
you've jinxed it, and now they're going to beat Fulham 5-0 at the weekend.
I don't know, mate. It doesn't look like this is a team that's got 5 goals in them at the moment. I
don't need them.
Yeah. But anyway, Atleti get themselves back into it. Obviously, Ben White handball. It's adjudged to be a pen. And Alvarez scores an equally good spot kick. And it's 1-1. And so then you're looking at how the rest of the 35 minutes are going to play out, whatever's left. Arteta does make subs over that period. Simeone's a bit more conservative about making changes as you get towards that halfway stage of the second period. But before the hour mark, you see Eze coming on for Odegaard. And then you see Trossard, Saka, Gabi Jesus all coming in for Martinelli, Madueke and Gyökeres as we get towards the 70th minute mark. But obviously the big talking point by the end is Arsenal's penalty that never was. Hanko, it's a penalty, mate. It's a penalty. The ref gives the penalty, right? It looks... as Saka plays the ball in and it's on his toe and he turns away, and Hanko does make the does make the lunge, and for me, it's not conclusive that he doesn't touch him.
This is what I was going to say, right? Like, I'm not 100% sure it's like a stonewall penalty in the way it's been talked about. But I think once the decision is made, it is wild to overturn it on the evidence that they have. The only counter argument I would maybe make out is that I think there is more contact from Ben White on Ademola Lookman minutes beforehand, and Lookman stays on his feet and gets a shot off. We always talk about praising players for staying on their feet. And if we're going to make these kind of calls, are we further encouraging people to go down? I also think that Eze dives late. I think there's enough contact that he can go down. I don't think it's a particularly convincing dive in terms of how it is. There's contact, and the use of the word dive there is not supposed to be in any way sort of controversial. Like when you are caught, you kind of fall over, right? And I think that the action he makes there is not all that believable. But that's not to say that I think this should be overturned. I'm flabbergasted that it was overturned. But I'm not convinced it is the like stonewall penalty that people are talking about, because I think if that's the case, then one should be retrospectively given at the other end for Lookman staying on his feet.
Yeah, look, the referee's view, because he's kind of behind, as he has a good view of it, but like he has a view where he can't conclusively tell that Hanko's definitely clipped him, but he gives it, and he's right to give it from where he's standing, for sure. And I just don't believe that there's clear that he can say after watching the video, after other people watching the video, that he was wrong. That's what I don't understand.
I totally agree. I don't think there's any conclusive evidence.
I genuinely think, ironic really, we talk about Arsenal usually being the ones that bottle it. The referee's bottled it here. And like, he's obviously in a venomous atmosphere. Hanko and a couple of others are in his face, right? They're yelling at him. He's trying to listen to his headset, to what's going on. And the Atleti players are continuing to shout. Like, he's not listening to them. He's just trying to listen to his headset. But they're going constantly at it. The fans are obviously getting angry. They don't want this penalty to go against them. And I think he's like, do I want my decision to be the advantage going into a second leg? Or can we all live without this? And it's even until a more fair goal is scored. And I think that's what's happened. And I think that, don't get me wrong, I do not want to be a referee, like at any level. I hate it. I hate the pressure that comes with being a referee and the kind of decisions that you make, being so sure of what you believe to be true to actually be true. I can't handle that personally. But this guy obviously can. He's in that position. He's worked his way up to be a Champions League referee. He should be able to have the conviction to stand by what you saw in the first place and see that even on the replay, he wasn't really wrong. I think we could sit here for the next hour, me and you, mate, watching replays and still be split potentially between us. And if we're split, then you can't say it's not a penalty.
Yeah, you can't overturn it. Like that's what I'm getting at. Like I think that the bit that I'm most kind of like wow about is the fact that it's overturned. And I just don't believe there's any sort of conclusive evidence there to overturn it. I think that if it wasn't given on the pitch, and I know the point you make about the referee is a valid one there in terms of where he's standing. I think if it's not given on the pitch, I'm not sure there's enough there that you'd then go and overturn it the other way.
I don't think Arteta would have had a problem with it. I'm just seeing some quotes from him now that are just dropping in. He says, speaking to the boys and understanding the penalty incident for the second goal getting overturned, it was against the rules and I don't understand it. I'm very upset. There is clear contact. He makes the decision and you can't overturn it when you have to watch it 13 times. I think he's right on this one.
Yeah,
I think he's right.
I think there's also been a bit like, and I know you said it earlier, kind of just off cuff, and I would like to go back to some of the reactions to this, not just kind of online, because you expect there to be kind of people going over the top with things over online, but some of the reactions to it post game on the TV here, even in the commentary box, in terms of the first penalty that's given against Arsenal. I don't necessarily look. I think the Alphonso Davies one yesterday is far more egregious, like to be given as a penalty. than this one, where his hand is clearly quite far away from his body and there isn't the same kind of deflection. Yes, the ball is going wide and it's a little bit mishit, but his hand is away from his body. I don't think that there's any world, especially in the. And look, I don't necessarily love this being given.
But it's consistently given.
It's consistently given in the Champions League. And even with the Alphonso Davies one yesterday, I was like, look, I really don't love it. I don't necessarily want that to be a penalty. But it's going to be given in the Champions League, even if I don't agree with it. And so I think that conflating the two decisions, and we're seeing this is that two controversial penalties given in this game that will upset Arsenal fans. I'm like, that does the second one almost a disservice, because I don't think there's all that much controversy in the fact that first one is given in a Champions League game.
Yeah. And look, Eze is getting a bit of stick. People are saying he's dived. People are saying he's thrown himself to the floor. There's not enough contact for a foul. Like, Eze has done exactly his job. He's got into a dangerous position. He's waiting for someone to make a challenge that could end in him getting a penalty in a situation like that, which is going to decide a game. And he's got it. Like, do I think he was looking for the pen? Yes. Do I think that that's wrong? No, I don't.
No, that's fine. But I think in the same breath, we would praise Lookman for staying on his feet, no?
Yeah, but that's the decision that the player can make. You can praise someone for staying on his feet. I don't think Eze would have gained anything there from staying on his feet, because I don't think it was going to lead to anything good. And perhaps that's why he has gone down. But equally, look, when I was younger, let's say when I was 15 and being coached in Fulham's academy or whatever, right? I remember being taught very clearly, when you're in the box, as soon as you turn, if you feel any contact, go down. Like, we'll take the pen. And that's going back some time now, but I don't believe that the principles would have been that far changed through to the future generations coming through to be taught as an attacking player. If you're turning in the box and you feel anything, you go down. And I don't think he's dived to the extent he hasn't felt anything. I think there was contact.
No. I agree. I think there's as I was trying to kind of explain earlier, I think there's a motion to go down that you have to kind of do with a clip like that. But equally, there's nothing, I'm with you in that there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that is part of the modern game, like it or not. Like, that is part of the game. And it is one of those things that, you ultimately have to kind of deal with and discuss. Just to come away from the decisions for a little while, because I think that whilst there's going to be a lot of discussion around that, there was also, a really interesting other 85 minutes. And you mentioned it. I thought Atleti started really well. I thought Arsenal weathered that storm. I thought they took control of the game quite nicely. And at the point where they got the penalty just before halftime, I thought they were in the ascendancy. Now, some of the discussion around it was absolutely unbelievable half from Arsenal. And whilst I thought that was potentially a slight hyperbole, actually what they'd done there was quieten the crowd, got through the initial storm, then taken some control into the game and started to play a little bit more openly at that point. And I was like, okay, fine, that's not a problem. In the second half, I thought they came out and they started well. And obviously, Atleti are a little bit wild at that point in terms of trying to find their moment. They get the breakthrough in terms of the penalty that's given and Alvarez smoking it. And then suddenly, you're like, wow, this is the Atleti storm. And this is it. And suddenly Griezmann is absolutely everywhere. And suddenly he's chip-shotting onto the crossbar from a falling position and having volleys kind of blocked. There's an Ademola Lookman one that's blocked off the line. In terms of the way that the game played out, I think that Arsenal will feel, unfairly hard done by that penalty decision. But I actually think if you take the game on balance of play in the second half, and actually you look at the numbers around it, the amount of shots on target, the amount of work that a goalkeeper had to do, actually it was probably at the very least that Atleti deserved was kind of going into the second leg level.
Yeah, I don't think it's an unfair outcome in the game. But then, Arsenal say, Declan Rice has hit one. I thought it was a goal. I thought the way that the ball hit the back stanchion and rolled across the back of the goal, I thought Declan Rice has actually scored.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I thought that Alvarez had in the first half with the free kick.
Yeah. So, yeah, Atleti, the stats certainly lean towards them, but I think you probably would have anticipated that to happen anyway. And it'll be interesting now to see what approach they take to go into the Emirates. I assume Arsenal are now slight favourites to advance to the final, just because they're at home in the second leg. I don't personally know that is that much of an advantage, to be honest, because I don't believe that the Emirates is a particular fortress right now. I think they'll be great scenes leading into kickoff, but I also think there'll be a great sense of anticipation and nervousness that I don't think would have been the case the other way around if the second leg was at the Metropolitano. I think the other three teams left in this competition expect to compete in a final and believe that they would win a final. And with Arsenal, obviously they would deny this and say that they also believe that, but I don't get that same sense of genuine belief in belonging right here, right now, even though they should feel they do, because they are one of the best teams around. I just don't get the same sense from them.
I think interesting, like obviously they've made history in kind of back-to-back semi-finals for the first time. This would be a potential first Champions League final since 2006 and just a second time ever. All of these things are incredible achievements, and you have to break the mold to actually make history, right? But I do still think with Arsenal, and maybe this is an advantage going into the second leg, but I think that the nerves have been ratcheted up by the fact that it's just a semi-final of a major cup competition, no matter really what it is. That, you know, you listen to Arsenal podcasters, you read Arsenal blogs, you kind of get the feeling around it that the Champions League has been quite a nice distraction for most of the season, whilst all of the focus was, okay, get the Premier League title over there and let's see what we get on, how we get on in the Champions League. And you know what, I think as they've got closer to it, and especially now with the Premier League title race tightening up to the extent that it has, that, you know, it feels like it's kind of this weird alternate pressure that's come in almost from nowhere, up to the point where they were maybe playing quarterfinal football. It was almost expected. It was like, well, you know, we'll just sort of see how we go. And now the idea that Arsenal might be in, you know, just their second final and potentially win the trophy for the first time in history feels like oh wow, that's another whole heap of pressure that's kind of piled on in a different way. But having said that, I think that Arsenal's last three performances, in terms of the City game, where I thought that they played pretty well, in terms of the Newcastle game, where up to when Eze and Havertz went off, I thought Arsenal looked a bit more expansive and a lot more fluid in terms of the way that they were attacking. And then today, where I thought they managed the game really well in spells. You know, they had to kind of suffer a few waves of pressure, and I still kind of maintain that Atleti probably edged it, but going away to the Metropolitano and being edged by an Atleti side who have thrown everything into this competition at this point because there is nothing left to play for in La Liga and they've lost the Copa del Rey final, is no mean feat within itself, especially for an Atleti side that, yes, are different to the ones that have gone before. They are no longer clean sheet specialists. They are no longer defence first. This is an Atleti side who were better today, I thought, from a defensive standpoint than they have been in recent weeks or recent months even, but actually have kind of pivoted a little bit to being a team that will outscore you to an extent. I think that they know that this is everything for the season, whereas there's still split loyalties in terms of where Arsenal are, in terms of what they can win and what's the bigger priority, et cetera, et cetera. That feels like a thing that no one else in the competition has to deal with right now. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that's what maybe is weighing on them in a slightly different way as a fan base than perhaps what is, you know, kind of more generally with everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are three massive games coming up for Arsenal, two of which they're involved in the next week and one of which they're not. On Saturday, they play against Fulham and they can go 6 points clear at the top of the Premier League, right? If they manage to do that, which you would expect they will be putting the shoe back on the other foot, and then Man City have got to bounce back and show that they have not lost any momentum in the league. So then it's back to Man City on Monday, where they go to Everton. And that's a big game. You know, every Arsenal fan is watching that game, right? You're watching it as if you are Everton. Be, yeah. They should all be Everton fans that night, right? And you're just hoping that City don't win that game. And then the next night, you've got a Champions League semi-final. So you've got Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, three of the biggest games as an Arsenal fan you're ever going to watch. Like, this is why you do it. This is why you could put yourself through the ringer and then you wait to see if you come out the other side. It's out of your control. There's nothing you can do apart from maybe take a couple of days off work to enjoy it all and soak it all in or deal with it. And, mate, that's a fun place to be. I know there's been this tendency to make fun of Arsenal or like to hate on Arsenal, but like, as a fan, they are in dreamland to have a game where they're going to go 6 point. I know it's not a real 6 point lead, but it's still a 6 point lead that has to be.
You'd rather have the points in hand.
You'd rather have the points in the bag,
the games
right?
in hand.
They can get the points in the bag, and they give themselves. It's their last opportunity to give City something to think about, right? It's their last chance for City to be the ones that bottle it. So they've got to go and get those points in the bag, and then once they've done that job, they've got to just sit back and then see what City do. And then flip the script the next night, go into the Champions League and get themselves into a Champions League final in Budapest on home turf. And they can celebrate at the Emirates, getting through to a Champions League final, and then looking at their run-in of what's to come if they're going to go and make history. This is what it's all about, mate.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. You know, and look, all of the jokes and all of the chat and all of the discussion that's been taking place online and has kind of been within it. You know, most clubs, almost every club in the world would kill to be in the position that Arsenal are in right now. Right, like almost every fan base in the world.
Even me as a Fulham fan.
Oh, yeah, I mean that's beyond the realms of possibility. We don't even dream of these kind of things. We dream of the Conference League quarterfinals. But you know, this is the top of the top. This is the ability and the moments to make history. And yes, there's probably a sense of people being aggrieved, but there is also this incredible emotionally charged 4 days coming up here, where it's going to feel like every ounce of air is being squeezed out of you, I imagine, as an Arsenal fan during, 270 minutes, maybe more, of football. That, it's kind of a place to sit back and be like, wow, we've put ourselves in these incredible positions. Now, can we go and get over the line? It's an incredible achievement to be there. The question is going to be, what comes next? And we'll find out in a week's time when we're back on this podcast talking about it. We're going to know the answers to so many of these questions. And that's an exciting place to be as journalists as well.
We're in for a cracking week of football. We all wait all year to get to this April-May period of the campaign because, it's time for business. This is when the big boys stand up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on that bombshell, we're going to call this podcast to a close. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast as ever. We appreciate you. Doogie and Sam are back on Friday with A Truth, where they're talking about the potential next managers of both Manchester United and Chelsea, as well as a little bit on Real Madrid as well. So make sure you're locked in for that one. Dean and I will be back with you. Slightly different way we're going to do it next week. We're going to split the games between us just because of some commitments that both of us have in various parts of the world. So I'm going to be covering this game between Arsenal and Atleti on Tuesday, and then Dean's going to be doing the Wednesday game between PSG and Bayern. We're going to mash them together. It'll go out on Wednesday night, so that will be Champions League takeaway next week for you. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all very, very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.